It's spooky month. Man, do I love Halloween. For Halloween, I have many traditions, whether it's playing Luigi's Mansion for the 100th time or rewatching the original Halloween movie again. However, one thing that I added to that tradition last year would have to be Danny Phantom. I love watching Danny Phantom so much. While not exactly a horror show, the show is a slice-of-life action comedy with some spooky elements. The main character, Danny Fenton, accidentally gets ghost powers from his parents' ghost portal, so he fights ghosts in secret while balancing the ups and downs of growing up as a teenager in high school. There's a lot about Danny Phantom that I love, from the visuals, characters, and themes. I want to highlight some of my favorite episodes in depth and explain why they're my favorites. Without further ado, let's go straight into this. Urban Jungle. Danny and his friends are chilling until a new ghost villain called Undergrowth invades Amity Park. Danny's powers prove to not be effective against Undergrowth, so Danny goes into hiding. Eventually, thanks to some encouragement from Frostbite, Danny learns about his new ghost powers, gains the courage to stand up to Undergrowth, and saves the day. Would you look at that, a Season 3 episode made it onto the list. If you've been following the Danny Phantom fanbase, you'll know how much of a letdown Season 3 was. Not terrible, but certainly below the other two seasons. Although this episode carries similar bad trends of Season 3, this is the only one where much of it works. What I mainly love about this episode is the development given to Danny and its overall message. Danny Phantom is a very relatable show in terms of what it was like growing up as a teen, developing your emotions to a greater degree, and becoming more self-aware of what you're capable of, something all of us have dealt with. Dealing with fear and anxiety, to be specific. Like a lot of superheroes, Danny's powers have always been related to his emotions. I like it when Frostbite tells Danny,
"Now then, concentrate. Let the energy build until it has nowhere to go but out."
And it's that lesson that allows Danny to use his new powers to defeat Undergrowth. Danny essentially learns how to be brave in the face of danger, which is something I wasn't expecting. I always felt like Danny didn't need to learn how to be brave because of what occurred in the past few seasons. He fought major threats like the Ghost King and even his scary, stronger future self. But now I get the idea that in those instances, Danny either had his friends or some gadget beside him to ease his nerves. There was always a plan B, so to say. No act of faith or anything major on the line. So I love the fact that in order for Danny to defeat Undergrowth, he had to believe in himself and actively act in the face of danger, rather than run away from it. Which can be extremely challenging to do, as we are often told not to do dangerous things unprepared. But I also like the secondary lesson about how Frostbite mentions to Danny that he always had this power due to his ghost breath, that he just had to let it all out to be given the power. For many of us, we doubt our abilities and don't even bother to reach our full potential, because we fear there is none. However, sometimes you don't need to worry about whether you're capable or haven't worked hard enough to achieve those skills. Sometimes the power is deep inside you. You just have to believe in yourself and let it all out. Trust your intuition. If anything, this episode motivates me to take more cold showers. Overall, it's a great lesson about how there are times in our lives where we are going to fight our own battles. We just have to believe in ourselves and encourage our way towards victory. Aside from that, there's also some comedic bits I enjoy. Frostbite training Danny and Danny's overall growing popularity as a hero in Season 3 was a nice development. Undergrowth continues the season's new ghost villains being less human-like and more monster-like, which works for this episode since he's supposed to invoke fear into Danny from his size, also played by Mark Hamill. Overall, this is just a very solid episode. Fanning the Flames. A new rock star named Ember McLean begins performing at Amity Park. She turns out to be a new ghost villain who becomes stronger every time they chant her name. She puts a spell on Danny, making him fall for Sam. So Sam must find a way to break the spell so Danny can stop Ember from becoming more powerful. When it comes to character development, Sam and Danny have it best here. This is the first episode in which it is hinted of them becoming more than just friends, with them sharing an actual deeper interest in one another. I like the subtle moments the two have with each other, Danny remarking on Sam's intelligence, and Sam warming Danny's hands. It also shows how Danny is still struggling with his emotions and such. He experiences a kind of blind love towards Sam when put under Ember's spell, and then when Sam breaks Danny's heart, Danny and Sam are unsure about the whole thing. Granted, while Ember is mostly to blame, I see it as a metaphor for how growing up, understanding what it means to actually love someone can be confusing. With how Danny was always into shallow girls like Paulina due to their physical attraction. With Sam it was more so with personality, but then he kinda loses himself in the idea of her and them being a thing. Danny also experiences heartbreak for the first time, and at that age, geez, young love is brutal. While I don't entirely relate to the feeling of love Danny feels in this episode, I relate in the feeling of believing you have something good, when it was really just an illusion created to blind you from the reality of your situation. It feels very personal, which is what I like about Danny Phantom. Ember is a solid villain. She's pretty unlikable but is so powerful and threatening. It's also nice to see a new animated fictional character write a song that I will always remember. Overall, this episode rocks. Teacher of the Year. Danny accidentally releases Technus while playing an online video game. Technus plans on taking over the world by entering and beating the video game. Danny must stop him, but he must first improve his grades so he won't be held back a year. This episode, upon rewatch, really stuck with me. Compared to a lot of Danny Phantom episodes, the school setting was always just a setting. Very rarely were there episodes about general schoolwork, but if there was, it would be about football or the prom. What I like most about this episode is the lesson Danny learns about work responsibility and balancing free time. I feel like there was a point in our teens where the idea of pulling our own weight and working towards our efforts to contribute to society felt like a very unfun way to live life. We still feel like when we were children with how our parents were responsible for everything we did. We'd rather play video games all day than finish a test or do homework, so it's hard to grow past that. Danny is well intended in this episode. I like when Danny and Lance are in the car together and Danny says,
"Then you need to get out more.
And you need to stay in more."
Danny views Lancer as overly strict, while Lancer views Danny as overly loose. Both aren't exactly wrong. What it comes down to is balance. So my favorite moment is when Danny disciplines himself after he disappoints Lancer and takes responsibility. And my second is by the end when Lancer is revealed to be into the same dumb fun. Speaking of Lancer, Lancer is my favorite in this episode. Despite being the classic Nickelodeon crazy teacher, Lancer feels really down to earth when he talks about being paid the minimum wage. The scene where Danny makes up with Lancer speaks to me. I've always respected my teachers, but never really liked the education system. Mostly because of how 95% of what is taught, I've never had to apply much in my life. But if school taught me anything, it taught me the value of hard work. Me writing essays and revising is mostly to thank for going to school. I love it when cartoons do episodes based on a video game setting. The fact that Danny and Tucker's usernames are Ghost Boy and Friar Tuck is absolutely hilarious to me. The twist of Sam being revealed to be the guy destroying Danny and Tucker in the game, I don't know why I didn't see that coming. It was also cool to see not just Danny but his friends join in on the fight, and just overall a very funny episode. Flirting with Disaster. Technus returns and takes control of Axiom Labs to take over the world. Meanwhile, he tricks Danny and Valerie into having feelings for one another as a distraction. So not only does Danny have to stop Technus, but also stop Valerie from trying to end him. As the first Season 2 episode on this list, this is where Season 2 got really good for me. They raised the bar in terms of drama, character development, animation, and action. To start, I love the drama going on. Technus tricking Danny and Valerie into getting together as a distraction, pretending to be her against Danny and then later upgrading her suit so she has more reason to want to get revenge on Danny Phantom. The relationship between Danny and Valerie has always been really interesting, but this took it to a whole new level. Valerie is such a great character. Despite her pettiness and anger, she is the most human villain in this show, because of what she's gone through.
See why I need to hunt these ghosts? They think they can do whatever they want, but somebody has to stop them.
Even when she gets her new suit, it's terrifying, but also really satisfying. She's not a bad person, just can't seem to find the right battle to fight. It's also nice to see the continuity after Rainstorm, with her father being more strict and worried about her safety after being revealed she fights ghosts. The romantic relationship between Danny and Valerie is also great. While Danny tries to see a reason to be with her, he learns that even if you could adjust, make room, and think of ways to make two things that shouldn't go together work, some things are just not meant to be. It's not even that Danny did anything wrong, it's just there are too many outside factors out of his control. Aside from that, the action and animation is among my favorites here. The fight scene between Danny, Valerie without her suit, and Technus with it is top notch. Something about the way Danny goes behind Technus and blasts that beam of energy to take him down is super satisfying to me. Them fighting in space while Danny references his dream of becoming an astronaut is so awesome. Just a great season 2 episode. Masters of all time. Vlad infects Tucker and Sam with his ecto-acne, so Danny has to help him find a cure. Danny decides to go back in time to stop the accident that gave Vlad his ecto-acne as well as ghost powers. However, in doing so he changes the future for the worst, and so he must go back in time to fix his mistake. While I wasn't a crazy fan of this episode when I first saw it back then, I grew to appreciate it a ton for its message. It's the classic retelling of It's a Wonderful Life, with how Danny wishes he could live with a normal family, accidentally gets that wish, doesn't like how it turns out, and grows to appreciate what he has in spite of its flaws. But the theme I like is the theme of choice in the midst of your situations. Every character resents an aspect of their lives. Danny doesn't like how embarrassing his parents are. Jack wishes he didn't have ghost powers so he could be with Maddie. Maddie couldn't pursue her passion of ghosts or have kids cause Vlad didn't support her desires. The only truly satisfied character is Vlad, now finally given what he's always wanted. Vlad and Jack switching roles is what stands out to me the most. Vlad's character has always been my favorite as his circumstances, what he went through, and the lack of support of the pain he endured being isolated for so long always made me wonder if what he went through made him to be as spiteful as he is. As humans, it's natural for us to want things in our lives that make us happy, and when we give so much to the world and receive nothing in return, it's hard to not feel anger from the unfairness of it all. Jack goes through this when he loses the love of his life, people don't respect him, and is lonely. But in spite of that, he doesn't try to lash out at others or use his powers to get back at the world. Instead, he chooses to use his powers to help others, as shown by the ring transformation being white like Danny's instead of Vlad's traditional black. It's an episode that speaks to me as I try to be very optimistic, good, happy person, but sometimes I wonder if I was stripped away from everything important to me in my life, would I still be able to choose to do good? Would I still want to do the right thing when I'm never rewarded for it? Aside from that, Season 2 continues to raise the bar for me. The fact that we get to see a character as awesome as Clockwork again is so great. A ghost that isn't evil but whose purpose is to watch the world choose to set itself in place is great. The alternative timeline setting is awesome too. While it's somewhat disappointing that Jack doesn't get his own unique ghost costume look, instead just being a chubby version of Vlad, it was still really fun to watch. I love Jack as a character, so it's interesting to see this optimistic, goofy man become depressed, but still hopeful. Even the scene where he's wailing on Danny is so funny to me, because even when he's a threat, he's still too goofy to ever be seen as evil. Suffice to say, I would go back in time to watch this episode again. Bitter reunions. Danny and his family traveled to Wisconsin to meet up with Vlad, Jack's old lab partner in college and best friend. However, Vlad turns out to be a half ghost and is out to get revenge on Jack for causing the accident that ruined his life. This is the introduction episode to Danny's main villain and rival, Vlad Masters, aka Vlad Plasmius, and boy does this episode deliver. Vlad has always been my favorite character, and so when I rewatched this episode while pretending like I saw it for the first time, it really cemented how much of an impact he made. Not only does he establish the truce Danny and him have not to reveal each other's identities, but it explains how he's responsible for how dangerous ghosts could even be let out purposely into the world. Not because of Danny or Jack's ghost portal, but his. Vlad is such an interesting character. The way in which he was robbed at a chance to have a relationship with Maddie, was isolated for so long, abandoned, and had to figure out his powers alone makes him the perfect dark reflection of how Danny could have been without his friends. Yet despite that, he still feels responsible for what he does with how he has money, his friends actually came to visit him, and has ghost powers. The world is kind to him, he just doesn't see or want to acknowledge it. He's like Valerie but less sympathetic.
All you'd have to do is renounce your idiot father.
Dude, you are one seriously crazed up Fruit Loop. That is never going to happen.
That line never gets old, I swear. I also feel like by the end there's a subtle message about forgiveness and not being defined by your past mistakes. Jack messes up a lot and can be idiotic, but he's still good at heart and tries to make up. Whereas Vlad holds grudges and is stuck in the past, dwelling too much on what went wrong than making things right. Coupled with that, this episode is just very fun. The pace feels very fast with so many jokes thrown out. I swear Jack's joke about Harriet Chin and then immediately pogoing and Danny looking embarrassed is gonna be forever stuck in my mind in terms of hilarity. When Danny encounters Vlad for the first time and gets absolutely destroyed, it was brutal. It's the first time Danny has ever been that vulnerable against his enemies. I love watching Vlad fight with his experience, and the fact that we get to see him make duplicates of himself before Danny is shocking. Just an incredible episode. Rainstorm. After Vlad accidentally releases the Ghost King, Pariah Dark, cool name by the way, Pariah invades Amity Park. Coupled with that, every ghost Danny has fought in previous episodes is loose and goes into hiding. So Danny must find a way to stop Pariah and save his town with the help of others. This is the first episode special on this list, and boy does this deliver. It's like the Avengers Endgame of Danny Phantom episodes. Every villain is here, from Vlad, Valerie, Skulker, Ember, and such. The plot is dense and is truly epic. I think what I mainly like about this episode, that I love about Danny Phantom in general, is the heart they give to each character. What I like a lot about Danny's rogues of villains is despite their bad actions, they still feel human in some of their motivations. Even when they don't entirely, it's still nice to see some goodness come from them. Seeing them all come together at the end to help Danny after they previously laughed at his suggestion to help shows that while they're unlikable, they're still people who can learn from their mistakes. Valerie helping Danny despite not trusting him was so cool to see even if it was short, but who really shines is Vlad in this episode. Even though he's partially to blame for the whole mess and has ill intentions, this is the first time Vlad has teamed up with Danny, worked hard, and being the one to clean up his mess at the end is so satisfying. Even Maddie forgives him in the end after saving Danny. This episode's theme is also really good. I guess it was only a matter of time before Danny learned the saying, "With great power comes great responsibility." Good thing he didn't learn it from a dead uncle.
No, you're not. Using your powers to get back at people you don't like. Throwing the first punch. You're more like me than you know.
Unless you want to count Uncle Vlad, who is half dead, I guess. how Danny uses his powers to get back at Dash multiple times, thus making him the bully. I like this message because even if characters like Vlad, Skulker, and Dash deserve it, they are still human. That, and you shouldn't abuse your powers, but instead do what's right. Coupled with that, this episode feels really impactful for Danny. Granted, he has the suit which eases his nerves, but standing up to the Ghost King when he's at full power and beating him, the fact that he becomes more trustworthy in the eyes of people is really nice to see. Just an overall amazing episode. My Brother's Keeper. Danny is feeling down lately, so Jazz makes him see a school therapist. However, the therapist, Miss Spectra, turns out to be a new ghost villain who feeds off of negative emotions. In order to defeat her, Danny must improve his self-esteem. By all means, this episode should be my number 1. If you ask me, it has the most heart out of any Danny Phantom episode I've seen. This episode touches on Danny's emotions again, this time exploring depression and self-esteem. Something I remember all too well growing up. While I wouldn't say I was someone who struggled with depression, I feel like the older I got and more self-aware I became, the more my mistakes became all the more visible. So I was a lot harder on myself back then, and even so now. Despite this episode being fairly funny and lighthearted, this is one of the few where Danny's sadness and anger towards himself kind of made me feel it. Cause that's what depression ultimately is. Anger directed at yourself. As I grow older, I come to realize just how important self-love is to your survival. It's like the crutches that keep you going. And while it can sometimes make you blind to your flaws, removing your ego can make you forget when you do things naturally right. Danny really shines in this episode for me. He doesn't beat Spectra by outsmarting her, but by finally walking past the doubts he felt about himself and finally recognizing the real danger.
And you're done telling me what to do!
It's super satisfying to watch, like someone falling down the stairs over and over and then finally climbing them back up. So what makes this episode truly great is Jazz. Jazz as a character was never my favorite. I liked her, but I never felt like she played too much of an interesting role. But this, her finding out about Danny having ghost powers, choosing to not tell anyone, and using that understanding as empathy is just so good. I love it because to me, the greatest people in your life are those that don't just know you, but understand you. People may think they know you, but to truly know someone, you have to understand them at their core. The fact that Jazz is so patient with Danny despite how angry he is at her, and Danny realizes this, is so impactful. The ending especially speaks to me. The way Danny floats off in the distance after finally being free from his negative emotions, and Jazz notices feeling proud of Danny is just so great. Aside from that, I really enjoyed Spectra as a villain. Her design and how she feeds off of negative emotions, how subtly evil and malicious she is as a therapist is terrifying. I also like Bertram, her assistant. His design with the sunglasses always reminds me of Luigi's Mansion 2 with the greenies. Just a great episode full of heart. Maternal instincts. Danny and his mom Maddie get invited to a science symposium, but end up in the woods instead. It turns out to be a scheme by Vlad in order to get Danny and Maddie to join him. Meanwhile, Jack and Jazz have to defend themselves from Vlad's ghost minion. Back then, when I first saw this episode, I really didn't like it. Mainly because of one reason, but in general, it never stuck too much in my mind. But upon rewatching it, my lord is this episode great. This is the follow-up episode to Danny and Vlad's rivalry in bitter reunions, and the continuity is incredible. For starters, I love Vlad's villainy. The fact that he actually admits his feelings towards Maddie, while subtly bullying Danny in the background, his plan in luring them both into his second house, send his minions to murder Jack, zap Danny's powers away, and then throws him into the wild in order to be eaten alive is just my lord. He's such a deadly antagonist in this episode compared to how he was in the last one. The shot of Vlad looking in the mirror while Danny behind him and then briefly switching to them when they're in ghost form with the purple fire in the background is just chilling. It's one of my favorite shots in the entire show. I also like how while Danny Phantom isn't really a very spooky show, this one feels a bit so more in regard to setting. The mansion in the forest, dead animals, and the fact that it's nighttime makes this episode stand out more. The way they get lured there from an invite always gives me Luigi's Mansion 1 vibes. Coupled with that, Danny and his mom's relationship is really nice. This episode is certainly relatable for me, especially when Danny's mom touches him and he rejects her affection. Growing up and becoming more distant from your parents' love, but also not so much rejecting it entirely. It's a really sweet episode between two characters. Danny is also really great. I love the fact that even though he's not as strong and experienced as Vlad with his powers, the way in which he tricks Vlad was genius. Although this right here is partly why I first disliked this episode so much. Maybe it was my bias towards Vlad and just wanting to see villains as actual dangerous threats. But I always found it really cheap that Danny plays dirty by essentially tying his shoelaces together. It would be like if I set my opponent's controls to smash all wrong to mess up their muscle memory. However, I will say that I do like the fact that he outsmarts Vlad again. Plus, it's super cool how he manages to actually take him down in such a satisfying beatdown, whereas previously Danny got bodied hard by him. Just in general, this episode's concept of some guy who wants to get together with a married mom, meanwhile her son and him fight secretly with ghost powers is just so much fun. I can't recommend it enough. The ultimate enemy. In the future, Danny is the most evil ghost on the planet, and so the ghost Clockwork is assigned a mission to destroy him. Meanwhile, Danny is studying for the CAT test to determine his future, and is given an opportunity to cheat until he is sucked back in time. He learns about his future self and now has to stop him before his dark future becomes reality. So yeah, if you're a Danny Phantom fan, you probably saw this episode coming. Easily one of the greatest Danny Phantom episodes, not just because of how dark it is, but what it teaches. This episode's theme about how your choices now affect your future is so profound. As someone who sometimes stresses my own future a lot, this is an episode that hits home. So often I think about the choices I've made in my past and how they've made me into who I am now. The people I've influenced and how much good I want to believe I've done. While I don't entirely encourage such stress about the decisions that will affect you in the future, I think the point of this episode is considering your choices and learning from them. More so being aware of how your choices determine who you will become. That we all have a choice to do what's right. Danny chooses not to give in to his evil self and desires. By doing so, he's able to save the people he loves. This episode does a lot for Danny's character. Aside from that, the story is amazing. While I'm not a crazy fan of time travel episodes, especially with how confusing they get, like how throwing that boomerang makes it travel to that time, it's always interesting to watch how characters turn out in the future. Dark Danny is so much fun to watch. The fact that he's a combination of Vlad and Danny's ghost powers, and how he has the ghostly wail is just frightening. The fact that Danny is even able to beat him almost feels like luck. This is also just one of the darkest episodes. The way how the characters actually end up gone, don't even get to be ghosts, and that Danny must confront the ugly side of himself is just wow. Talk about taking risks in a kids show. Jazz admitting to Danny the truth about how she always knew was such a nice payoff. And Clockwork is just one of the best characters ever. The ultimate enemy is undoubtedly the ultimate package. If you made it this far, here is this. Yep, that is me. I went as Danny Phantom last year for Halloween, and now I'm wearing a Danny Phantom cap. Can you believe that? Thank you so much for watching my Danny Phantom video. I am recording this on October 1st, and it was raining here a bit, so I think that's kind of fitting. You know, it's a nice Halloween-ish setting. I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to record because of the rain, but it stopped. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching my Danny Phantom top 10 list. Maybe I'll talk more about Danny Phantom more in the future. With that being said, this is Crime Lord Discord, and we'll meet again. Oh, and happy Halloween.